Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian for Breaking Down Security. With me this week, of course, is Mr. Boettcher.
What's up?
And Ms. Berlin.
Are we missing somebody?
We're not. Are we missing somebody? It's International Women's Day, and we're missing the lady person on our show, the XX.
Oh,
yeah. Ms. Berlin actually hit me up about a half hour ago, said she's just driving into Louisville, Kentucky right now. So, yeah, she probably won't be able to join us. She's been driving all day. So, she also sends her condolences because she always misses the good podcasts. I'm going to bring our guest in immediately, but I have some other stuff before we get started with him. You know him, you love him. If you've been at a conference with him, you know Noid. Welcome, Noid, to the show.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Internet peoples.
Yes. So he told us just before we started recording, this is the first podcast he's ever done, and I'm stymied by that. I don't know. Is it because of the place you used to work at wouldn't let you come on to stuff like this on the reg, or?
It was basically that. It was, I'm sure they may not. I just never wanted to go through the hassle of finding out.
Yeah, I know people who work for the company you used to work for, and you had to go through like a PR class or something and learn how to talk to media, quote unquote.
Yeah. So. It's the handful of times I spoke at events while I was there. It's one of the reasons I usually present under my handle. Right.
I'm glad you're able to finally join us, because we don't get a lot of people from of your stature on the show. So it's appreciative. So before we get started, we do have a topic that we're going to be talking with Noid, but I have a quick LogMD story for Mr. Boettcher, because as many of you know or don't know in this case, LogMD is a tool that Mr. Boettcher, he's the lead developer of. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what that is first, sir.
What LogMD is? Well, sure. It's a tool that runs on Windows, and it helps you set the right things to be able to detect an attack in the future if that should happen. Right. Possibly, if you hook up your logging, forward it to a SIM, things like that. And once it is attacked, it will desperately help you with trying to figure out what happened on the machines.
Right.
It'll help forensics people, IR people, because it helps you log the right things, right? Not necessarily log everything, but tells you what to turn on, audits the machines, things like that.
Cool. Okay. So I was at SeaSec East, which is my local meetup that I've got here in the Seattle area. Seattle being the Redmond, Bellevue, Mercer Island area of Seattle. If you know where that is, it's on the other side of the lake, Lake Washington. First of the month, first Wednesday of every month, you can come out, and we'll either be at a restaurant, or like last Wednesday, we had a talk with my carpool buddy and Dr. Crispin Cowan about threat modeling that we do at my organization. And one of our attendees, his name is Gabe, and he works for one of the counties here in the area. And he told me that he bought a license of LogMD from you, sir.
Oh, very nice.
He said he bought it because he had used the free version, and he found out when he had scanned his environment that LogMD showed him that his GPOs were not necessarily propagating all of the fixes from his Active Directory server.
Right.
And he said that because of LogMD, he was actually able to find out that his GPO was not doing what it was supposed to do, and it actually increased his security posture. So there you go.
Very good. That's a good story.
Yeah. I was very pleased to hear such a success story. So yeah, he's very pleased. He said it was well worth the money and effort, and he's looking forward to using that at other parts of his organization.
The pro version comes with a ton more features. It's so awesome because you get to whitelist, you get to filter things out, you get to have a master digest of things, and then it has virus total integration, all kinds of stuff.
Right. Yeah, they're not a sponsor of the show, LogMD, but Mr. Boettcher, I've been with him before LogMD, so it's a nice blue team tool. But yeah, the county he works for is one of the ones that's being more proactive because there's been, Sammamish. We talked about Sammamish, one of the news stories about ransomware here. We talked about, there's other cities and counties in the country that are having issues with ransomware, and his security guy or director of IT or whoever it is he answers to is being very proactive about security, saying, hey, we need to do what's necessary to secure our own systems. So one of those things is they're pulling up LogMD. So, yeah,
that whole Sammamish ransomware thing, that was crazy.
I don't know what I need to go and follow up on that because I don't know if there was any updates. The last thing I had heard that the mayor had asked for emergency monies, and as of it looks like January 24th, they were still looking at it. So. Yeah, they had hired somebody from Montana to discuss the bits on that. So, 5 days ago. So, ransomware information attack hub. Is the city still in a state of emergency? Yes, as of March 4th, we have made some progress, but are still in a state of emergency and are completely out of the situation. They've been working on this for over 2 months.
Wow.
To fix this shite.
Well, look at what happened to Maersk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No.
Maersk, one of the largest shipping companies in the world. And they were paralyzed for months?
Yep.
Before they restored back to 100% operations?
Yep. Says, when will the city be back up and running? This is a FAQ on their website. I'll probably put a link in the show notes to this, but we were able to recover most of our information from backup servers. Oh, that's nice. As the information arrives, it's being scanned to make sure it doesn't have any malware hiding on it. Once they're certain they're clean, will be redeployed. We're doing this one system at a time. Oh my God. That sounds awful. Was any customer employee information compromised? Forensics investigation still in progress so far. LMG, which I'm assuming is the company they hired, has not found any evidence of breach or of personal info. Wow, that's crazy. So they've been working at this for 2 months and they're still in what's called a state of emergency. Goodness. Yeah, it's no joke. And that's not even being, local news here has not even covered that. So that's still amazing.
Yeah, a couple of years ago it came out where if you're under HIPAA, you have to prove, the burden is on you to prove that personal information wasn't taken. Right. So the logging on each machine becomes really important because if you can't prove that this machine did not have data, personal data stolen out of it, healthcare data, then basically you're fined.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we've been telling people assume breach.
Exactly.
Well, and they listened.
Yep.
Yes.
So yeah, let me put that link in the show notes. If you want to read the entire FAQ, because they've got questions all the way back starting on February 1st. Why is this taking so long? Wouldn't it have been easier to pay the ransom? Who's helping the city with recovery efforts? So yeah, there's a whole big bunch of stuff in that link. So that's pretty cool. So those of you who are on the Slack or are wanting to join the Slack, we actually got a new moderator. He's actually been doing our book club for a while. His name's JB. He lives in Arkansas. He used to live in Germany, and he runs our European and Asia book club. So if you're interested in doing that on a fine Saturday morning here in the U.S., or if you're in the evening time in Europe or early morning on Sunday in Asia, then feel free to join our Slack and get involved with that. Our next book is going to be in the U.S. with Dave Sybuck, is going to be the Chris Hadnagy book, the SE Social Engineering, Science of Human Hacking. We had Chris Hadnagy on the show to discuss the book a little while ago when it first came out. So if you're interested, you can check out that podcast too. So, and JB's boss, Jerry. Well, hey Jerry, what's up, buddy? Anyway, I told JB I'd give you a shout out on the show. So there you go. All right. So without further ado, and we'll talk about that last announcement at the end of the show. So, Mr. Noid, you spoke at B-Side Seattle.
I did.
And it was fairly excellent talk. As a matter of fact, I was taking furious notes. I have the notes in my notebook here. Looks like the Grail Diary from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But let me see here. It was basically how people talk Yep. There they are, right there. I'm trying to get these other folks on here too, so hopefully another week. It's not a bug; it's a feature. So, I've got 3 pages worth of notes here, just from your stuff. So that was fairly impressive.
Well, thank you.
No, I really liked it. I think it's one of these timeless things we need to talk about. So maybe you could give a little background before we get started about yourself, because this is your first time on a podcast. So why don't you talk about yourself a little bit, how you got to where you're at, how, your bona fides, if you will.
All right. Yeah, this is the part I always don't like.
Tell us how awesome you are.
So I've been doing the hacker thing since probably the late 80s, as my handle would imply. It was an ad campaign from 1987.
Right.
The Domino's Pizza Noid thing.
Yep.
But I've been working in InfoSec for 25 years at this point.
Nice.
Back in the early 90s, I got involved with DEF CON and ended up helping be one of the senior staffers for DEF CON for the better part of 20 years before I handed that off. Also started another security conference in Southern California called Layer 1, which is coming up in May.
Cool.
Really awesome conference, really low key. I recommend people check it out. Then, living up here in the Northwest, it just made more sense for the rest of the LA-based crew to just run the show, and I stepped back from that. And since then, I've just been sort of an information security practitioner, just sort of going around, doing my thing, do a lot of non-computer stuff in my spare time.
Awesome.
But yeah, and I've worked in everything when it comes to information security. I've done everything from network administration through compliance, through red team, blue team, you name it. And that's so one of the nice things about having been in InfoSec for so long, that as it's evolved from just being, because that's how it used to be. If you worked in InfoSec, you did all of that because that's what InfoSec was.
Right.
You did not have the luxury of being able to say, well, I'm a forensics guy.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's other duties as assigned. You're the IT guy or you're the security and forensics guy, or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
My first security job, I was a network administrator who also knew how to secure systems.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and that's how I started too, at least in the Navy. I was IT, and then it was like, oh, you need to be able to patch all these things or run these scripts or do whatever. And yeah, it was very similar. So, yeah. So you've transitioned away from that into more of a PM type role, right?
Nope. I'm actually back into an engineering role.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so I spent some time at another company where I was in a PM role.
Okay.
I'd kind of left an engineering position, spent a bunch of time in sort of this weird limbo of some engineering, some PM. The company I was at was a software development company, and the way they looked at it was, if you were an engineer by their standards, you were a software developer.
Okay.
And so what you ended up with is a whole bunch of people at that company that are effectively subject matter experts, but because they're not devs and because they're not test, they all sort of fell under PM.
Okay.
But where I'm at now, I'm actually back in much more of an engineering role, although my PM time seems to follow me because I find myself doing a fair amount of that and also engineering things.
Sure. Okay. So your talk, is more like a story from the trenches thing, which was great. Hearing somebody who's gone through a lot of these things, and a lot of these stories kind of resonated with me because I was the security guy at one time. Worked with Mr. Boettcher very, very much at one company. That a lot of these things kind of struck home with me on these. So you realized that there was a problem, and we're kind of going to go through your slides. The slides are in the show notes, as well as audio from the talk. So if you want to hear the original talk, that's in our show notes as well. So you said the story time, you realized there was a problem. So you worked in a centralized security organization, and go ahead.
Yeah, so I was in a centralized security organization that oversaw online services and that type of stuff. And we had a lot of policy and procedure in place. We had things in our minds, very well organized, very well put together, but didn't quite realize the problem until I left that organization and went to work on a product team that happened to live under the purview of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
And now all of a sudden I'm a customer effectively to my former team. And I'm now seeing things from the other side, and I'm realizing things weren't as nice and well put together as they appeared on the previous side of the fence that I'd been on.
Right.
The analogy that I'd used during my talk was like being at the post office, where you're in the back with all the machinery and you're watching the mail get sorted and the packages get sorted, and you just, the amount of automation going on is just blowing your mind. But meanwhile, you've forgotten to build a front door to your post office, and nobody can actually drop letters off.
Right.
And so that was kind of some of the stuff that I discovered. And I found that it was very difficult to engage with my former team.
Yeah. So one of the questions I have is, you worked in the security department for a good number of months, years, and what made you want to move over to the development side?
Largely, it was motivated by career development.
Okay.
When you work at a software development company, if you want to get ahead and you're not a software developer, you need to spend some time being where software gets written. You need to spend some time. It's one thing if you're a software developer at a software development company, you'll get promoted, you'll advance your career by working on the right products and the right features and making the company money. If you're part of the other, in the organization, you need to be able to know how software gets written at a software development organization, or you're not going to go anywhere. And so I went to basically go do my time watching software get developed. Okay.
Were the people in your security department going, "Why are you leaving?"
Not really. I'd been there for a long time, and it's not uncommon for people to sort of move around.
That makes sense. And for me, it's like I don't move around to a different division. I had to move to another company to get moved to a different job. So
and it all depends on the size of the company. I mean, I've been at companies that were small enough that, I want to get promoted, I'm going to have to go work literally someplace else. But then you work for big companies. I was at another gigantic company early on in my career in the 90s. It was the same thing. If I'd wanted to, I could have spent my entire career there, moving around, and hell, I'd still be there.
Okay, so you were in the security department, and everybody was doing what was necessary, and you, once you got over to the development side, you found an entirely different viewpoint.
Correct.
Okay.
So once I'm over at the developer side of things, I'm starting to see, previously, we had seen the developers from our security perspective as sort of thumbing their noses at us. We had seen them as sort of, not taking security seriously, quote unquote. But meanwhile, I'm now actually watching software being written, and I'm getting a better understanding for what's going on.
But that assumption was true, right? Or was it? It was not true.
Yeah, it was not true. What it was how we were engaging with that team. What was happening is, by not understanding that team's release cadence, not understanding what their sprint cadences were, things like that, effectively, we were showing up orthogonally at the 11th hour before a major release and saying, "You guys need to do a bunch of stuff." At which point they were pushing back and saying, "Go away." No, you showed up effectively. We showed up at the wrong time. And that was kind of like the real sort of the crux of my talk, was ultimately understanding the timing of how the teams you're influencing, understanding the timelines they operate on. Because if I show up right as you're tucking into your planning for your next release, you're more inclined to listen to me.
Right.
But if I turn up 48 hours before go live, it doesn't matter how good my ideas are.
Yeah.
You're going to send me packing. Or as devs will do, they'll tell you to, cut a ticket and put it in the backlog.
Right.
where it will then languish for all eternity.
So you said it was a centralized security department, but it seems like that there was more communications issues, and maybe the security team had a bit of a myopic view on how things were being done.
I think part of what it was is we were talking to each other a lot, not necessarily talking to the people we needed to be talking to.
Weird.
Or the other thing that happens a lot too is you'll have conversations that happen at different levels. I've been in a lot of companies where senior leadership from team A goes and meets with senior leadership with team B. And as far as they're concerned, they're in lockstep with each other. They see eye to eye, everything's sorted out great, but the message never quite filters down to the individual teams.
Right.
So you end up with people, for example, sometimes like a good PM in a software development organization will play the role of the bouncer and basically chase off external parties that show up and say, hey, I want to bother the devs. PM will say, no, I control who sees the devs, go away. That guy may have never gotten the message.
Right.
That no, we're working with these people now.
Yeah.
So you see that a lot too. And meanwhile, leadership's like, well, what do you mean things are messed up? You know, I'm a senior principal director and I met with my senior principal director peer and we had all this stuff hashed out. Why is it still a problem? And it's like, well, because organizationally it never filtered down.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and at some points it gets political because if something fails, it's on somebody's head, and that could be a method of being managed out, or or what have you. So it gets political, and people want to CYA quite a bit. So
yeah, no, and I can't fault them for that. Right. I mean, covering your butt is, whether you're working in the mailroom or whether you're on Mahogany Row. I mean, you. Covering your butt is sort of like one of the number one things you do. Mm-hmm. Because at some point, you might be glad you did. I know plenty of times that I have, and it's been great. And I've gotten burned hard a couple of times where I knew I should have, but I didn't. And I figured this one time it's not going to come back and bite me in the ass. And then suddenly here we are. And it did.
You said Mahogany Row?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
Really?
That's better than C-Suite or whatever. Yeah, Mahogany Row. That's nice.
Oh yeah, no, Mahogany Row. God, I thought that was like a 70s, 80s term, I think. I used when I was a young guy starting out in the early 90s.
Yeah.
It was the term the old guys used.
Nice.
Okay.
To describe where the execs hung out.
Right.
That's been lost, but it's brought back now. Hey.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You heard it, now you can't unhear it.
Nice. Nope. So, what hit me the first thing I wrote down for my notes was that, and this is on your third slide, I think, your fifth slide. Developers are motivated by different things than security people. Security people help manage business risk, and developers are focused on product and feature development. I think that was like, monkey touch monolith moment for me with regards to, that, everybody should be thinking like that. But companies with security teams who think, they're just, or compliance people even. I mean, compliance can be even worse than security folks at times.
Oh, yeah.
That, they're, the people who are creating our product, they don't really care, and it just seems to me that, we're motivated by different things. And it's important.
You got to understand. Well, that's the thing. And you got to understand at the end of the day, if I'm trying to get you to do something, I've got to get you motivated by the thing you care about, because what motivates you isn't necessarily what motivates me. And if I come to you and I say, hey, I need you to do this, and man, it's going to really reduce our risk surface. It's going to really reduce, our threat surface. It's going to reduce overall risk for the environment. And the developer sits back and goes, what? I could care less about this. No, I need to make sure that this thing meets the spec that was written. And I don't even know what you're talking about. Whereas if I go to that same developer and I say, hey, this will help increase the, stability and performance of your application. And it's also going to allow you to be able to onboard customers that happen to have XYZ requirements.
Yeah.
So you can expand your customer base. Now it's like, oh, so my feature if it adheres to these specs, might grow the widget we're producing.
Right.
All right. Because that's what they'll get rewarded on.
So it's easy to tell the people that there are features that you need to implement to increase security, but what if there's already like a list of things that they're supposed to get? Mr. Boettcher is a filthy dev. He's got a list of things that
Yep.
I'm just kidding, Mr. Boettcher. So Mr. Boettcher's got a list of things for his LogMD, for instance, and I come in and I go, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z because, security requires it, or, new compliance, bloggity blah says you have to do that. And how do we get, because it's not just so much telling them that it's going to make it better. They have to triage these bugs in terms of importance. Like, $100 million customer wants X. So that's going to be the first thing, regardless, no matter what, they want this widget. They're going to get this widget because they're a $100 million customer versus, security guy down the hallway wants you to sanitize all your inputs because of X. How do we get them to equate our changes and fixes with the $100 million customer, or is that even possible?
Oh, it's possible. It's just, this is back to my original point about timing. Mm-hmm. This is where engaging early and often and having that rapport about, okay, when do you guys plan your release cycles? When do you plan, when are you shipping version 15? Are you doing minor revs in the meantime? This is where that early engagement can help, because part of it too, as security people, is we need to learn how to be flexible. Because, there's always that, it seems like, especially earlier on in your career, where security is the most important thing. Right. And when you see the business make a decision to go with something, it's like, we only have time to do one thing, and there's two things on the plate. One's a security thing, one's a business thing, and the business chooses the business thing. Mm. As a young security person, a lot of us throw our hands up and go, I can't believe these people, just idiots, all of them. Right. But then you later realize that at the end of the day, like, the business thing is what's going to make the money. Mm-hmm. It's so when it comes to this stuff, is having a good understanding of the timelines that your product teams are working on, knowing when they're doing their planning, knowing when to engage in there, getting in early and like, hey, just letting you know, I've got 20 things coming your way. 3 of them are being demanded by giant megacorp customer, right? That we don't want to lose. 3 of them are being asked about by another customer that we want to get. And then the rest are, semi-triaged by us, and we want to get that out in front of you. And when those teams come back and say, okay, let's horse trade now. Yep. I've already got 30 things on my plate for the next release. You say this thing is a medium. How medium is that medium? And at which point you can horse trade a little bit. You can sit back and say, okay, look, the customer requirements are non-negotiable. At the end of the day, it's non-negotiable. You know that. I know that. Even though sometimes the requirement seems almost a little absurd. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you've got a high-end customer and they spending lots of money, they can make crazy demands. But in terms of the other stuff, you can say, okay, look, the world's not going to end if you don't fix issues, C, D, and E, mm-hmm. Until the next minor revision. Right. So can we throw those in the backlog for the next minor revision and go look at them then? But none of this happens if you're not engaging early and often with them. If you're showing up at the 11th hour and waving a giant stack of papers around demanding they must do a bunch of things, they're going to just tune you out. Right. Right. One of the checks here you said was make sure there's clear two-way path for communication. Seems like your original story with the security team and the dev teams, there wasn't a lot of communication. Did that get better once you moved over to the dev team, or did it not? Well, it got better for me because I was now in the dev team, and these dudes literally sat down the hall for me. And on top of that, the PM dev pairing over there was kind of your classic sort of, you have a manager The manager's got PMs under them. The PMs have devs sort of dotted line assigned to them. Meanwhile, those devs have a manager on their side, and it's that constant back and forth. Right. Okay, where are you at on this thing? Where are you? So the communication's a lot better because we're having daily scrums, things like that. As far as communication back to the sort of larger mothership centralized security organization, no, still continued to have issues there where edicts would come out and my devs would come to me and be like, hey man, does this make sense? Like, these guys are asking for blank, and call me crazy, but this doesn't make a lick of sense. And I'm looking over at some of the demands, and it's like, yeah, that's weird. There's no way we can implement that, or why we would.
Yeah.
It's like, should we not care about it? Yeah. Just, yeah, sure. Just, put it in the backlog.
Yep. Mr. Boettcher, do you have any questions? I feel like I'm hogging the time here, and I want to make sure you get your stuff in there.
Well, you said, does the PM have to, when you say, yeah, this really doesn't make sense, is that coming from a security point of view? Because you have a security background, that this is BS, what they're asking for. Because most PMs don't have that security background, so they wouldn't be able to say things like that with authority or with that knowledge. Right?
True.
So how is a security person supposed to convey that to the people?
And you are exactly right. The reason why I can look at it very quickly and say, yeah, we don't need to care about that, is because this is what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But for example, I worked on a team with a bunch of other PMs who had no security experience. And some of them were very inquisitive. Some of them expressed a lot of knowledge. They wanted to talk to me about things. They would come to me with what they potentially thought were security issues. They would come to me with the occasional question like, hey, we're onboarding this new customer and they want blank. Is that feasible? So what it would come down to is I established myself as the SME and would answer those questions. And every time I find myself in that position, I try to educate everyone around me, simply because being the SME a lot of times freaks me out. Sure. I would much rather spread knowledge so there isn't a single point of failure. But yeah, no, really what it comes down to is meeting with your other PMs as well and explaining, like when we'd have our weekly PM meetings, security, because it was really it was like one of the newer, more commonly brought up topics for the team that I was on.
Because of the, news cycle.
Well, that and part of it was
all the time.
That and part of it was because the other standard stuff was just your traditional feature development. Here's a feature, build a spec, build the feature to the spec, test it, deploy it. So now there's this security person here working on weird, non-standard things. So it's kind of like, all right, let's give Noid a chance to kind of flap his gums for a bit. So I would encourage my team to ask questions. I would encourage my team to give me feedback. Was I communicating with them effectively? Like, one of the big things I always like to end with when somebody approaches me with something they don't understand is asking them at the end, like, does it make more sense to you now?
Yeah.
And if not, the answer, it's perfectly fine to say no.
Right.
Like, it still doesn't make a lick of sense to me.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, we'll keep talking about it then. And we'll maybe change approaches to talking about it. But yeah, one of the big things I do, though, is I would make sure that I wasn't sort of the security guy off in my own new vacuum that was just me. I made sure that information I had, I disseminated out to my team as well, and encourage them to communicate with me as well.
Cool.
Now, this is a question for both of you guys. Big stick compliance. You say it doesn't work and it has never worked. Why?
Because it doesn't work. It's so
self-referential.
Yeah, I know. So the reason why I say it doesn't work is because most companies at the end of the day are motivated by money. They make a product, they sell a service, and that is their bread and butter.
Right. When
you get in the way of that, you run the risk of being bulldozered.
Right.
They can just steamroll over the top of you. So,
but if I have the power of PCI or HIPAA or these compliance frameworks that the company has to abide by, I mean, I don't see how there's a question.
Well, it all kind of depends too on how far do we want to comply with these things?
Oh, so do we want to play games with compliance? It says we have to have antivirus, but it doesn't say we have to be running it. It doesn't say we have to update it.
Yep.
It doesn't even say that, we have to, have it on all the machines, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's on all of our critical assets. And we were allowed to define what assets we considered critical, so that kind of thing. So you do have compliance, but at the end of the day, compliance gets so overused that a lot of management and a lot of developers, early on, you could use something like PCI to really kind of wave, hey, you guys need to do this for PCI. Then eventually people seem to figure out that you say that about everything. Mm-hmm. And if everything's a PCI requirement, then nothing's a PCI requirement.
Wolf.
Yeah, exactly. So you end up with these situations where, and we as security people, we did that.
Yeah,
we did that. That's on us. But we, certain environments you can get away with big stick compliance, like military and government.
Yeah,
you have to do this, or I'm going to throw you in the brig.
Yep.
When it comes to things like compliance, it's like, how far do we want to go along with meeting the requirement? Like the antivirus thing is perfect because I've literally seen an environment where, the machines had antivirus, which was the letter of the law, but it wasn't logging anything. It wasn't doing anything. It just, it's like, all right, when was the last time a virus was detected in this environment? So because the threat a lot of security teams always make is that we can block your release.
Right.
We can block that release. And the thing is, that never happens because there's always some level of, especially when money's on the line, there's some level of exception.
Yep.
That can get in place, and someone's willing to accept the risk on that exception of okay, we're going to go forward without blank, but we will do it later. And by later, I mean, we might just keep kicking it down the curb until we finally back ourselves into a corner we can't get out of.
Right.
But the idea that security can kind of step out in front and say, no, you have to do this or else, it's usually met with, or else what?
Right. Well, and there's power there, if you can say, do this or else, and, they may end up doing it, but you're only damaging your relationship. I know, we talked about the different types of power before we started recording, and this was a manager tools podcast as well that Mr. Boettcher turned me on to. There's, relationship power, there's role power, and then there's
expertise
power, which, if you're just using your role power saying, hey, I'm, by the power of compliance, I'm raising my arm like, the Gray Skull or whatever, He-Man, but, they'll do it, but you're not doing yourself any favors in the long run.
Yeah. And they're going to do a shitty job of it.
Right. They'll do bare minimum. Yeah.
Yeah. They'll do the bare. Okay. What's the bare minimum to get these fools to leave us alone?
Right.
So we can go back to doing things that we care about.
Right.
And it's a really, really hard way of going about it. It's playing the game on expert mode. If you're
a terrible way of influencing people when you're saying I outrank you, therefore you must do what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. It's like trying to get somebody to comply, by pointing a gun at them.
Right.
they'll probably will. Like, oh yeah, I'll give you my wallet if you're aiming a gun at me.
Yep.
We're not going to hang out.
Yes.
We're not buddies now. In fact, very good chance that you've just made an enemy for life,
Yep.
But so that's the thing. Like in my talk, I brought up the whole idea of what do I win by playing? And this is something that security folks, I think we need to look at, is when we are reaching out to developers, or when we're reaching out to people that are writing services, and we're trying to get them on board with whatever thing we want them to do, we need to be thinking about it from the terms of like, well, what do they win by playing?
Nice.
And this is where compliance can get tied back in with it as well. You tell people, oh, you have to do this because of ISO 27001.
Right.
And it's like, again, it's like, okay, well, I guess so. I'll do it, but I don't like you now. Whereas if you say, hey, if you do these ISO 27001, whatever type things, it can now expand our customer base because we've got these customers knocking at the door that want to use our product, but can't.
Right.
Because they've got themselves in a situation where so effectively this becomes a feature request. It's less of a compliance big stick, do it or else, but it's now a list of features required to expand customer adoption.
Right.
And so that's what they win by playing.
Yeah.
They do the thing and they can now tap into this like, oh, you just made your environment FedRAMP compliant? Great. Yep. You can now tap into the wide, wonderful world of government contracts.
Nice.
And all the money that comes along with it.
So one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm guilty of this, new compliance framework comes in, it's FedRAMP or it's PCI or whatever, and you go to the parties, you go to the devs, and you go, hey, we need to start implementing this, and they get all huffy, I get all huffy because they push back on me. One of the things I didn't ask, was myself looking at a good understanding of the documentation and then going to the devs and going, okay, what controls do we already have in place, to find, the gaps, to look for gap do the gap analysis before we go, well, we need to, do this. If we spring it on them as like, we have 800 items to do, they're going to assume, well, I've got 800 things to do. And in fact, maybe 75% of those things have already been done just in the normal course of application development. And, instead of 800 things, there's now only about, half a dozen things that have to be done, major things in any case.
And some of them, too, might even be things they're already working on.
Right.
That if they took it an extra step further, like, okay, you're building this widget that talks from sub-widget A to sub-widget B. If you make it use HTTPS, leverage SSH encryption, basically it's like, okay, we encrypt that channel
right
in that thing you're already making.
Yep.
That satisfies the requirement right there.
Yep.
Because a lot of times the first thing they're going to look at it is like, okay, that's 800 bugs. I'm going to stop working on all the things I'm working on to go work on 800 bugs that are all bullshit.
Yep.
From their perspective, when in reality, that might not be it at all.
Yep. And in a lot of cases, our security people, we see compliance as black and white when, like my friend Ms. Wendy Knox Everett says, look at the intent of the requirement, not the spirit of the, if you're needing logging, what exactly needs to be logged versus, log all the things, you need to look at the spirit of what they're trying to get out of versus, making sure everything is done properly. So, that can also... What's that?
Actually running through one of these exercises right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Where basically it's the, a customer at my current company wants us to provide them with some information. And we had a big meeting yesterday saying, oh my God, this is just going to be such a massive, overwhelming request. I can't believe that we have to do this. And one of my coworkers just said, no, guys. All they want to know is on things that haven't gotten, things that haven't met the bar, what's the residual risk?
Right.
That's all they want to know. We just need to show them a list of residual risk, how we rate that risk, and what our plan is for clean it up.
Right.
And all of a sudden it went from crap, we're going to be working on this all night and for days, to about a dozen things.
Right. And most compliance requirements, they'll do like plan of action milestones. So you can say, well, we're not doing all of that right now, but in the course of the next 6 months, we're going to, add features that will make that possible. So, nothing has to be done while the inspector is there. You trying to drop everything and get it to happen while that's going on is never helpful. So,
now, if anything, it sends up red flag.
Sure.
I know a well-known security guy who tells a story of doing an on-site audit years ago where people were literally running down the hallway in front of him, locking doors.
Yep.
And it's like, oh yeah, that ain't suspicious.
Right.
Like somehow he's not going to put that in his report.
Yeah.
Oh, the door was locked. They technically met the control. Okay, heard her. In reality, it was like, no, it's like this thing was just kind of a train wreck. And I can't believe what I was observing.
Yep.
So, I've seen organizations that were going to be scanned from the internet, and they said, "Whoa, you can't scan us from the internet. We got to go through change control first." And I'm scratching my head, going, "Change control? What do we have to change to? Isn't that just notification? You just got to put out like a week notification or whatever that you're going to be scanned. Just if anything goes wrong, hey, that you're going to be scanned between these hours." And come to find out, they were shutting down servers so they wouldn't be scanned, so they wouldn't find these assets, and it's just
terrible.
Seriously?
It's
terrible.
Do I know that organization, Mr. Boettcher?
Well, no.
Okay, good.
I'll just say that.
Good Lord.
Wow.
I would not actually be surprised if that was the case at the place that I thought of, but yeah, wowzers. Okay.
There's a lot of shenanigans that go on with security, and it's more of, if I don't know this, then I don't have to report it if something were to happen, things like that.
Oh yeah, plausible deniability.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it for part 1 of our interview with Noid. If you're interested in hearing more or discussing more with Noid, or finding him on Twitter to discuss various InfoSec related items, you can follow him on Twitter at _Noid, Noid _. There you go. You can follow the show, Brakesec Podcast, on Twitter at Brakesec, BRAKESEC. You can follow myself, Brian, at Brian Brake, BRYAN BRAKE. Mr. Boettcher, runs a program called LogMD. If you're interested in finding out more about what that does with regards to your Windows environment and helping to secure that, you can follow him on Twitter at BoettcherPwned, BoettcherPwned, and you can go to log-md.com. And Ms. Berlin's got a lot of stuff going on. She's got the mental health hackers villages, and you can follow her at Hackers Health on Twitter, or InfoSister, which is spelled INFOSYSTIR. One last announcement before we go. Spectre Ops is looking for people to take training and also to give training. So they have a class that's going on in April, and it's a red team training. So learning how to do red team engagements. It's at the end of April, 23rd through the 26th at the Hyatt Regency in Tyson's Corner in McLean, Virginia. So if you're interested in doing that, there's still plenty of tickets. Price is currently $4,000 US, which is that doesn't include hotel for the area of Tyson's Corner. But if you're interested in doing that, you can follow the link in the show notes and sign up. As to the teachers, they according to Mike P., one of our Slackers, who's also involved with some of the training, there's a thing called Workshop Con. So if you go to www.workshopcon.com/events, and they're looking for blue team trainers. So you'll get to hang out with folks from Spectre Ops, or maybe even Tim Tomes for Landmaster53 on Twitter, if you are interested in being blue team trainers. So they're always looking for people. So you can hit them up, or you can just join our Slack and find out, which you can do that by emailing bds.podcast@gmail.com, or sending us a DM to our Brakesec Twitter. So thank you to our patrons for supporting the podcast. They are rock stars and the real people who, are the power behind Brakesec. They help us, pay for hosting duties and Zooms and, the time and effort needed to make this happen. So if you're interested, you can feel free to give us a little tip jar. We have even something as little as $1 can be helpful towards keeping the podcast going. And, if you're interested, have a store. If you want a t-shirt, you can join us, in your solidarity and support of the Brakesec podcast. You can go to the TPub Brakesec site and buy a t-shirt. And we get a little kickback from that. But, you can always show your support for the podcast in that way as well. So we'll be back next week with the second part to Noid's interview. This has been Brian for Breaking Down Security. Have a great week. We'll talk to you again soon. Please take care of yourselves, and please be nice to one another.